Before this tale unfolds, pause for a moment to subscribe to the channel. If narratives centered on genuine feelings, fresh starts, and subtle shifts in destiny resonate with you, then you have arrived at the correct destination. Every tale shared here draws inspiration from experiences many encounter, but seldom discuss publicly. So, if you have ever felt unseen, ignored, or as though existence quietly progressed while you were merely enduring it, this narrative might seem somewhat recognizable. Now, let us commence. Sarah had always assumed that life's most significant transformations arrived with clamor. She envisioned they would manifest through intense discussions, daring choices, or unmistakable instances where everything abruptly altered. But as she matured, she understood that reality did not function that way. The most crucial pivot points often arrived silently. They slipped into ordinary mornings and simple choices, hiding within moments that seemed almost too insignificant to count. And on that mild Saturday afternoon in late spring, Sarah believed she was merely selecting an outfit. Sunlight streamed through the broad windows of her rural home in Vermont, casting soft amber patterns across the polished wooden floors. Outside, the community was tranquil. Birds sang somewhere in the distance, and a soft wind rustled the leaves of the large oak tree in the front yard. Inside the home, however, there was quiet. Not the soothing kind of quiet that feels peaceful. The other kind. The kind that echoes through vacant rooms and reminds you that there is no one else there to hear it. Sarah stood before the tall mirror in her bedroom longer than usual, studying the reflection, staring back at her. Her expression held a blend of curiosity and hesitation, as if she were looking at someone she knew but hadn't spoken to in ages. At 38, she didn't recognize herself as easily as she once had. Life had a strange way of altering people slowly, almost invisibly, until one day they paused long enough to notice that something within them had changed. She adjusted the hem of her burgundy dress, smoothing the fabric carefully with her hands. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic, but it was shorter than anything she had worn in years. Her fingers lingered on the material for a moment, as if questioning the choice she had just made. She could still change. Part of her almost did. For a brief second, she considered walking back to the wardrobe, replacing the dress with something safer, something more familiar, something that allowed her to fade comfortably into the background the way she had grown accustomed to doing. But instead, she straightened her posture. The dress stayed. She paired it with a soft cream cardigan that hung neatly from her shoulders. The outfit was simple, clean, and elegant without trying too hard. Low heels completed the look. Nothing about it was loud or attention-seeking, but it was intentional. And that alone made it feel different. For the first time in a very long while, Sarah wasn't dressing to disappear. She wasn't dressing to blend quietly into the scenery of her own life. She was dressing for herself. 3 years earlier, her marriage had ended. Not with a dramatic explosion, not with betrayal or angry arguments that shattered everything at once. Instead, it had ended slowly, quietly, like a candle burning down to its final flicker. After more than a decade together, she and her husband had simply grown tired. Life responsibilities, routines, work pressure, and emotional distance had built invisible walls between them. They tried to fix things. They tried to talk, but eventually both of them reached the same painful realization. Love alone wasn't enough to keep two people moving in the same direction. When the marriage ended, the house stayed the same. The furniture stayed, the pictures on the walls stayed, but the warmth left, the laughter disappeared first, then the routines they had built together, and eventually the quiet feeling of being truly seen by someone else faded away too. Most days after the divorce felt mechanical. Sarah woke up, went to work, answered emails, paid bills, and smiled politely when conversations required it. From the outside, her life looked normal, but inside something had changed. Her friends still cared about her, of course, but they were busy with their own lives. Families, children demanding careers. Their schedules filled quickly, leaving little space for spontaneous dinners or long heart-to-heart conversations the way they used to have years ago. No one meant to leave her behind. Life just moved forward, and sometimes people drifted slightly apart without realizing it. But today felt different. That morning, her phone had buzzed with a message from her closest friend, Megan. "Hey, I'm stopping by later with Ethan to grab those documents you borrowed." Sarah had smiled when she read it. Megan had been one of the few constants in her life. Through marriage struggles, the divorce, and the lonely months that followed, Megan had remained supportive and steady. Ethan, Megan's son, had always been part of that friendship, but mostly in the background. Sarah had known him since he was a child. She remembered birthday parties filled with balloons and loud laughter. She remembered scraped knees, school plays, and awkward teenage phases where Ethan barely spoke more than 2 sentences in a row. In her mind, he was still frozen in those memories. She hadn't stopped to consider the simple reality that time had moved forward for him, too. With one final glance in the mirror, Sarah brushed her hair back gently and took a slow breath. Then she headed downstairs. In the kitchen, she began preparing small things without fully realizing why. She placed 3 glasses neatly on the counter, filled a pitcher with iced tea, dropped a few cubes of ice inside. The ice clinked softly against the glass as she poured. Her hands trembled slightly. She paused, frowning. "Why am I nervous?" she murmured quietly to herself. It didn't make sense. This wasn't a date. She wasn't meeting strangers. It was just Megan, just Ethan. Yet something about the day carried a strange feeling she couldn't quite explain. Before she could think about it any longer, the doorbell rang. Sarah inhaled slowly. She smoothed her dress one more time and walked toward the front door. When she opened it, Megan stood there first. Her familiar bright smile instantly filled the doorway with warmth. "Hey," Megan said cheerfully as she stepped inside. "Thanks again for letting me swing by." "Of course," Sarah replied warmly. Then her eyes shifted slightly. Ethan stood just behind his mother. And for a brief moment, Sarah didn't recognize him. He was taller than she remembered, much taller. His shoulders were broader, his posture relaxed but confident. His dark hair was neatly styled, and the awkwardness she remembered from his teenage years had been replaced by a calm sense of self-assurance. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man. Their eyes met for a moment. Ethan's gaze flickered slightly, instinctively dropping toward her outfit before returning to her face. The movement was subtle, almost invisible. But Sarah noticed it. "Hi, Ethan," she said calmly. "Hi, Sarah," he replied, clearing his throat slightly. Then he added something unexpected. "You look nice." The compliment was simple but sincere. Sarah felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. Megan, completely unaware of the quiet moment that had just passed between them, continued chatting. As they moved toward the living room, Ethan sat down on the couch, resting his hands neatly on his knees while listening to the conversation. Sarah took a seat across from them. Out of habit, she crossed her legs slightly, and once again, she noticed Ethan glance away almost immediately, not staring, avoiding. The small detail lingered in her thoughts. Megan continued talking about work frustrations, office politics, and the chaos of managing a busy team. Sarah nodded occasionally, offering comments when needed, but beneath the normal conversation, a strange awareness filled the room. Sarah couldn't explain it. Nothing inappropriate had happened, nothing uncomfortable, yet something subtle had shifted in the atmosphere. After a few minutes, Megan's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "Oh no, I completely forgot. I need to call my boss." She stood up and gestured toward the door. "I'll just step outside for a minute." Then she turned toward Ethan. "Can you grab the papers from Sarah while I'm gone?" "Yeah, sure, Mom," he replied. Megan stepped onto the porch, leaving the front door slightly open behind her. Suddenly, the house felt quieter. Ethan stood up. "Where are the papers?" he asked. "On the dining table," Sarah replied. "I'll grab them." She walked toward the dining area. She could hear his footsteps behind her. Not too close, but close enough to notice. When she reached the table, she picked up the stack of documents and turned around. Ethan was standing nearer than she expected. "Here you go," she said, handing them to him. "Thanks," he replied. But he didn't move. Instead, he hesitated slightly. His fingers tightened around the papers. Sarah tilted her head gently. "Is everything okay?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "This might sound a little weird," he said carefully. "But I just wanted to say something." Sarah felt her heart skip, not from fear, but from curiosity. "What is it?" He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Seeing you today, you just seem different," he said. "In a good way." Sarah blinked. "Different?" "Yeah," he continued. "More confident, happier, like you're finally living for yourself." The words surprised her, not because they were inappropriate, but because they were honest. "Oh," she said softly. "Well, thank you." "I mean it," he added quickly after everything you've been through. "It's nice to see you like this." A quiet wave of emotion passed through her chest. "That's very kind of you, Ethan," she replied gently. "It's taken time, but I'm trying to find myself again." He nodded. "You deserve that." For a brief moment they stood there in silence. Two people connected, not by expectation, but by simple honesty. Then Megan's voice called from the porch. "I'm done." Ethan stepped back quickly, suddenly aware of the space between them again. "I should give these to my mom," he said. Sarah smiled. Go ahead. A few minutes later, Megan and Ethan were leaving. The door closed, and the house returned to its familiar quiet. Sarah leaned against the door for a moment and exhaled slowly. Nothing dramatic had happened, nothing inappropriate. Yet, something small had shifted inside her. For the first time in years, she hadn't felt invisible. And sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that quietly remind us we're still alive.